Right, welcome back, and we're still talking about matters climate change. Remember, this particular whole week, even as the Africa Climate Summit continues and enters day 2. So, in the face of the profound challenges posed by climate change in Africa, African leaders attending the International Climate Summit in Africa have called for collaboration in order to achieve and come up with, rather confront the existential threat to all of humanity as a result of climate change. Now, the summit is meant to accelerate climate action across the African continent and finance a just transition to a climate-resilient future. So we spoke to climate change experts attending the climate summit on how enhanced collaboration can drive progress by integrating climate considerations into economic and development planning. This coming in the backdrop of failed talks on climate financing during the COP27 last year. So how does the road to COP28 in Dubai look like? Joining me in studio is Dr. Jessie Owino, a greening and restoration expert, working and dig it. But first, let's listen to this sound bites before we actually talk about now matters forest, because I mean, even as the president has urged, Kenyans to plant 15 billion trees by 2032. How do you actually live and plant trees? Can that be achieved? Right. Before we actually listen to these two sound bites, yesterday that we spoke to these experts yesterday. Briefly, Dr. and welcome to TV47. First of all, how is the summit? The first ever under AU right here. How much is a big deal for Kenya hosting this particular summit, according to you?
Currently, with the climate discussions going on in the world, this is one of the best forums for Africa to actually start showcasing that we are serious in the climate change debate, in the climate issues that we are talking about. The African stories are so many and they're so diverse. And I feel that personally, I feel like this summit occurring in Kenya is so opportune because both politically and also within the industries we have been seeing signs of people willing and talking about supporting various initiatives on climate change and on climate restoration initiatives across the country and also across the continent. So having it here in Kenya is the best opportunity to showcase this, because we have diverse ecosystems that people can actually see how best to integrate the science and practice within industry and also for communities' benefit around the climate issues.
All right. Before we actually continue, allow me to, let's listen into this two sound bites of one. He is Dr. Richard Munang, who is the Deputy Regional Director of UNEP Africa, and also Alexander Fiali, Deputy German Ambassador to Kenya. Let's listen into this, then we come back and continue.
The Africa Climate Summit, starting today, 4th September 2023, is sending a message that, yes, there are challenges, but Africa have got solutions. And what are those solutions? Africa represents the lungs of the world. The Congo Basin forest absorbs carbon more than Amazon forests and Asian forests combined. At the same time, the continent have got 65% of uncultivated arable land, meaning that Africa can feed the world if transformational climate action solutions are leveraged. And more importantly, Africa have got 66% of the entire renewable energy potential combined. And lastly, the youthful population of the continent. Below the ages of 30, 70% of the entire African population. That is not just an opportunity. If the ingenuity is tapped, they can drive transformational solutions. And at the same time make the case that climate action is an investment opportunity. The continent of Africa today is a leader when it comes to climate action. Over 98% of the entire continent countries have ratified the Paris Climate Change Agreement, and over 46% of the entire continent have increased their ambition to drive transformational climate action solution. But on top of that, if you take Kenya, for example, Kenya is a leader in the entire world when it comes to clean energy. 93% of energy fed into Kenya national grid is renewable energy. That is historical. That then means Africa is leading. Africa is providing solutions. Action is happening. But the speed and scale at which it is happening is what we need to discuss. And that is why this conference is premised as transformational solutions and climate finance solutions for Africa and the world. And therefore, the conference provides an opportunity to present climate action as an investment opportunity, showcase the examples of the action that Africa has already taken, so that the requisite amounts, especially financial amounts, to bring impact to scale can be established. And so this is important, and Africa is not starting from scratch.
Germany has quite a big delegation here because we think that the Africa Climate Summit is a unique opportunity for Africa to form its voice, to unite its voice in the international climate policy and bring up the issues that are relevant for Africa.
Right, there you have it, Dr. Richard Monang, who's the Deputy Regional Director of UNEP Africa, and also representative of German, Alexander Feli, Deputy German Ambassador to Kenya. Doctor, we're listening to a representative of someone from Africa and then someone from Germany, speaking largely on matters, the importance of climate action. But this morning, I want us to focus on forestry, largely. How do you even plant a tree and all this? And you're a sharp mind in this when it comes to matters of forestry. But then in areas, in the arid and semi-arid lands. First of all, when the president says that we should plant 15 billion trees by 2032, is that achievable?
That is achievable as trees numbers. That is achievable. The question would just be how many community members are willing to also support the president in that initiative, because don't look at a tree that it has to be planted somewhere in a forest that is far from you. Mm-hmm. Plant it in a way that it is within your normal livelihood activities, and that is the only way for sustainability and also for the tree to be able to survive over time. Mm-hmm. So if you put it in the places that we also live in, then we can be able to have the trees surviving.
Right.
Yes.
And Dr. because you're as I say, a sharp mind in this, now educate us. Which kind of trees should I, for example, I live in Kitengela, which kind of trees should I be planting just outside my house?
Now, there is, for Kitengela, because there is a guide. There's a tree species site matching guide. Right. That is part of what I know Kenya Forestry Research Institutes focus on. Mm-hmm. And with such apps and also such information systems, a farmer in Kitengela would have an array of tree choices that are suitable for that environment, that they are able to plant, and also that these trees are also survive and also do not become invasive in future, so that the trees also offer economic benefits to you as the one who's planting, but also offer ecological services to the ecosystem in case like providing for nature, nutrition, and also feed for livestock for people like Kitengela.
Right.
Yes.
So just a mention for our viewers who are listening to us this morning. And by the way, you can actually call in to us. The number is just below your screens right now. Just to mention, which kind of species of trees should they be planting in different areas? For example, in urban areas like around Nairobi, if you decide to maybe plant a tree wherever you are, and also comparing to different regions, maybe even when you're in Kisumu, when you're in Mombasa, which kind of tree species should you avoid planting, and again, will you encourage to plant?
We've had challenges of invasive species, so I'd want to tackle those ones first. Mm-hmm. The key species to avoid is an invasive species, which is, like for Kenya, we have the prosopis, which grows in arid areas, and it covers areas that have been neglected and also degraded with poor management on the land. And then you find species like eucalyptus are not necessarily desirable around riparian areas. Right. So those to avoid such mistakes with tree species is very good. But then within plantations, because the species guide, I'm sure there are close to 300 species that are suitable for this country, for the different ecoregions. One of my main interests is usually dryland. So I know that the array of dryland species, there's a super species called Melia volkensi. It's been improved, volkensi. Okay. In Ukambani, they call it mukau. Oh. And it has been improved over time for it to be able to survive in so many ranges of semi-arid areas. And you even have the Acacia totilis, the Acacia niloticus, which many communities have local names for. And you find the areas whereby, like in arid and semi-arid areas, the trees that we actually promote and the ones that would actually be growing in these areas have local names for the communities that use them. So the communities are actually aware of them. And the challenge and one of the most interesting points for me with working with, let's say, with pastoralists is that pastoralists generally know their tree species more than anyone else in those environments.
But then, because I'm trying to find, there's on one hand, you do know this tree species, you have a name for it, you know all its uses from its, from the leaves, from the branch, from the roots, everything about it. But now there's the whole bit of now, the climate change, you probably, are some of these communities aware that maybe planting such kind of a tree here, it can have its adverse effects, or it can be beneficial in one way or another?
Now, most of that is where public education comes in, and even the media needs to also come in, because some tree information, a lot of them is available. Both, I know, academia and science produce a lot of materials around this. But then when it comes to now the awareness on these species, I have seen people planting wrong species in arid and semi-arids. You've seen people planting highland trees in their in land that they've bought in Kitengela all the way, let's say, to Kajiado, or up to Namanga, and you find species that are growing in some of those farms are not suited for those areas. And those trees actually not doing well. So such a farmer, such an interesting farmer, would need awareness to know that instead of going for the species that make sense in highland areas that you find in a tree nursery in a highland area, you'd rather get focused and get trees from tree nurseries that are actually within the areas that you want to plant, because there you'll get species that are actually suitable for your environment, and they'll actually thrive, because it is so expensive to plant a tree that ends up dying, let's say, within 2 or 3 years, because you have to repeat, and then the land is still left bare over time. But if you get the species that actually survive in these areas, you'd find with the normal, even with the climate change that is happening, there's very little amendments that you'd need to do to ensure that the tree survives over time.
Now, Dr. Someone probably lives in Buruburu, and in a whole high-rise, wherever they live, there are no trees. I mean, they're just buildings. And when we started, I was asking you, how achievable is it planting 15 billion trees? Because we live in a space where we're trying to urbanize where we live, have more buildings, have more high-rise kind of apartments. So this person is listening to us this morning, and they're wondering, I'd love to plant a tree, but where am I planting this tree if around me there's no space to plant a tree?
I'd want them to also look beyond their
where they live, okay?
Because like urban forestry is a very important sector. Like you find most of the global north countries actually understand the concept of urban forestry, is that there's the parks, the green parks, and people actually spend a lot of time in the parks. You find there's also an aspect of ornamental forestry, things like bonsai, the tree bonsais which come from Japan, which are very old trees planted in bowls. So such kind of initiatives, and for me I'm seeing opportunities for the youth in such spaces, because you can actually create a husbandry practice for some of the tree species and actually have them as indoor tree species. Instead of like a Christmas tree, you buying a branch every year of some tree, think about having a tree that you can actually nurture in your own house and maintain it in a way that every other Christmas, the tree is still alive and it's still within your house. That improves your improves your abilities and happiness also within your own home.
So what you do is just keep the lights, store them, alafu the next year.
You have a tree that you're taking care of, because we take care of pets, we can also take care of trees within our own homesteads. Yes.
But now curious, because again now your expertise largely is on the dry areas, the arid areas. And people would wonder, why would I plant a tree in an urban area? For example, from where I come from, and not si Kuringa, lakini Kisii kuna miti nyingi, and Kisii unasemanga leo kuna nyesha. We call even the relatives leo kuna nyesha, because I mean in such areas, most of the western areas, they have a number of trees. But then so people from these particular places would say there's no need to plant more trees because there is enough, so we should plant more trees in areas where there is no trees, rather there are no trees in dry areas. Is that a correct notion?
No, that is not a correct notion. I've read materials about places like Kisii having tree-related conflicts on boundaries because both neighbors are claiming the same tree. So such kind of things for me actually show me opportunity, because it shows me that if both neighbors are actually able to plant their own boundary trees, they can actually have their own resource instead of now contesting for a single tree in the boundary that is looking that nice. So it means we have boundaries for our farm areas, which are areas which we really do not look at, but actually can sustain in a 100-meter boundary space. You can actually get around 20 trees planted on your boundary line. That is a big number of trees on your own compound, inside your own boundary, and they're not affecting your main occupation inside your own farm. So those kind of modifications, we call them tree planting modifications, and you find the different systems that you can be able to employ depending on how your agriculture is. People with coffee know about agroforestry because you need grevillea with your coffee so that the constant nutrients you get from grevillea feed into your coffee. So when you're aware of that, I know previously the tobacco used to be farmed together with trees also for the same reason. Tea actually has the species that actually of trees that can actually be farmed in tea farms. So this idea that we need a clean farm which is an empty farm for you to grow your crops actually needs to start changing, because that is actually the only way we're able to increase more trees on our own farms and also increase more trees generally for our nation and also for the continent.
So okay, now the fact that you're saying more trees, I'm curious. Can we ever have enough trees?
We cannot have enough trees because we use wood and wood materials for so many sectors of our economy. And you find the entire paper industry, as much as we'd like to move to paperless societies, is actually wood-based. You find a majority of our communities still cook with fuel wood variations, either charcoal or firewood directly. And all those are coming from various forestry products. You find we need things like wood carvings. We have various artisanal interests around trees, and that will always create the demand for tree and different type of species. We need fruits, and the population is always increasing, so we'll always reach a point whereby with every successive generation, we'll always find that we still need more trees to meet the demands of the population expansion that comes in. So unless we stop growing, we would never have a need for more trees.
And speak of even the fact that we definitely need to even have such a paper that I'm holding. You definitely remember the whole logging ban discussion, and a number of activists who are against it. Some were for it. From where you sit, what is your view on the same, having a logging ban in Kenya being lifted?
For me, the thing we have to think about is that there are farmers who grow trees as crops. And when they grow trees as a crop, that is a farmer who's grown any of the commercial timber species. And the reason why they're called commercial timber species is that you grow them, first of all, even in a monostand. So you grow them as cypress, as eucalyptus, as grevillea, or as pine, and they have a rotation age at which you must harvest them, otherwise you start losing the same material. So to such a farmer, I know a logging ban would look like very unfair, because this crop has reached age, you have to harvest it. Try and imagine a scenario whereby you have maize that you cannot harvest, and subsequent season is coming, so you end up losing your stock. But then there are areas whereby we have to protect also. We have water catchment areas, we have our key green areas as communities, and we need to have more of this. So generally we have not I think also protected enough of our water catchment areas. That is why there would be need to us to increase and even protect whatever trees exist in some of our water catchment areas, so that these areas are not supposed to even be used generally for commercial tree farming. But then we have other areas that we can find suitable for commercial tree farming, and such farmers need education on how best to engage in it, so that they do not grow the species that need to be harvested at a particular time in key infrastructure areas, like key ecosystems, like in protected zones, because a water catchment serves just even beyond your own farm. And you find, we've seen some cases of rivers drying because of trees being removed from a particular area. So there's more need for education around communities in terms of species growing, in terms of the need for tree farming. What type of tree farming do you want? Do you want ornamental? Do you want boundary? Do you want trees for your fuel wood? Or do you want to just grow commercial tree species for various markets. And if you're to do commercial tree species, I'd count on organizations like Kenya Forest Service to actually give Kenyans a guide on which areas are suitable enough for commercial tree species, so that there's no conflict with other ecosystem services and other key ecosystems around the same country. Right. Because there's so many fragile areas that need to be protected, and such decisions like logging bans are taken to protect key ecosystems that are usually under threat.
Right.
Yes.
Hold that particular thought, even as I remind the viewers that they can definitely call in live. The number is on your screens right about now. Tell us the kind of tree that is outside your homestead right about now. Do you even understand the purpose of that tree right there? And matters forestry as a country, do you really understand it? And what is your take on the forest cover, even as we seek to plant 15 billion trees by 2032? How many trees have you planted so far? Speaking of which, Just Dig It. Take us through, what does Just Dig It do?
Just Dig It Foundation is one of these organizations that is actually taking the restoration game for arid and semi-arid areas, rangelands, a notch higher, because Just Dig It, the operational modus is to regreen and restore degraded areas in rangelands, and it focuses on majorly large-scale restoration. So we're not talking about 2-hectare plots. We're talking about a 300-hectare community sites that have been degraded that are now available. And in restoration, normally there's the passive and also the active, whereby passive, we need the governance, we need the community grazing management to designate areas. And I'm going to use the case of the Maasai, because for Kenya, Just Dig It has been working majorly in Kajiado. And you'd find the communities like the Maasai have both the Enkaron, which is the wet season grazing area, and then the Olopololis, which are the dry season grazing areas. So you'd find because of climate change, the Olopololis are becoming more degraded and not having any grasses, so they're not able to support livelihoods, which is pastoralism, during the dry seasons, which they're supposed to do. So we Just Dig It partners with organizations. So we have Maasai Wilderness Conservation Trust, we have Amboseli Ecosystem Trust, we have South Rift Landowners Association, and these are some of the key partners who Just Dig It works with to actually restore degraded areas in Kajiado. We're talking about 3 different landscapes, and a landscape is an area which is generally around 100,000 hectares, and restoring that through use of partners and use of community systems, using easy-to-use solutions like the half-moon bands, which actually cause receded half-moon bands, which cause grass to come in, using the normal little rain that is available in Kajiado in such places, and you find you're restoring very large areas, and also setting up grass seed banks for women enterprises. These are components which allow the women to get into enterprise whereby they sell seed and they also sell hay. And the seed is a very key important component, because rangeland grasses, which the Maasais know, which we talk about some of the key species like the African foxtail, the Maasai love grass. These kind of grasses are in high demand, but are never available even in commercial quantities. So you have to have a grass seed bank whereby the women raise them, and then they supply this seed to be able to now restore larger areas around the communities. And the buy-in has been increasing because the success in some of the areas, because Just Dig It has actually restored more than 20,000 hectares in Kajiado actively, with pasture using the half-moon bands as a technology.
Dr. You hold that thought. We are due a short break, but the whole matters seeds, a very interesting topic that I really wanted to now delve deeper in, how to even select the kind of seed that you really want to, and also matters culture interference when it comes to even forestry largely, and climate change. Stick around. Remember, we're taking a short break, but then andika hiyo namba iko hapo chini vizuri, because when we come back, we'll definitely be taking your calls. So tafuta credit, call in live as you continue this particular discussion. in that particular area when it comes to also the forest cover. Some people tell you that they probably would cut trees or all that with trees depending on the culture. How does this, in your experience, how does this play out?
Whenever we plant trees, whenever you regreen areas, whenever you restore, one has to always be cognizant, before you even select the species, it is always useful to actually hold meetings with the communities, and they tell you the species, and we call them gender-based focus group discussions, whereby you talk to the women, find out which tree species were important for them. Talk to the men, find out which tree species were important for them. Because you'll realize that trees, the uses of trees and the uses of various vegetation materials in arid and semi-arid areas, even within pastoral areas, come within the use by the particular social demographic group. So you'd find women preferring species that either produce very good firewood or produce, if you're doing a bee alternative livelihoods like beekeeping, they'd be able to install beehives without climbing a tree, because some communities do not allow, frown upon women climbing trees. So you look for trees, women would actually be pro trees that actually branch. Some acacias branch at a very early low height that women can actually just mount beehives without necessarily climbing, which allows them to participate in other economic activities around the forestry industries. And then you find that even the men would prefer species that either are medicinal, that have more cultural values. There's some species that are used to make, let's say, the sticks that we see the Maasai with species like this, the cordias. These are trees that the men would always keep on mentioning them, because for them they have more cultural values, and some of these species can only come when you talk to the communities at first. So if you keep communities at the center of this discussion, you'd always go right with the species that you use. But if you keep communities away and we prescribe solutions, we will always go very wrong with the species that we produce. And that is when you will find us introducing species that the communities do not prefer, they do not relate to, they don't even have a local name for. One of my favorite tests for any tree species in my pastoral areas is to always ask for the local name of this tree. And if there's no local name, then I know that that tree is foreign. Because all the trees that are within pastoral areas, people have local names for these trees. So it is very important to use the community structures, the community culture in selecting the species, and also even in sites that we're doing deforestation. If there's some communities prefer, let's say, the graveyards, the burial sites to have trees, and other communities prefer no interference with burial sites. Right. So such nuances can only be derived after you engage with communities, especially prior to engaging in afforestation or revegetation of areas. Sometimes just ask the community which area is degraded and where would you want us to start.
Okay.
Yeah. And a simple question like that. Where do you want us to start? Yeah.
And I'm curious, which is your, would you point at a certain tree where you say, I've traveled in all my experience all these years, and this is my favorite tree? A particular tree? I
have, it depends on the asal area. I have tree species for Turkana that I love. Okay. I have tree species for Marsabit that I love. All over, I have tree species for different areas in Kajiado that I like. I have tree species. So depending on the area, the species that I like most of the time they come from the same areas because of their uses and that. So I have a good library of trees that I like. So if I go to a particular area, I find one of the trees that I just like to mention that Kenyans like to see, they see on the highways, let's say if you're passing via Naivasha, you see the acacia, Xanthophylla, this yellow-backed acacia. It looks beautiful.
Oh, yes.
But for us, it's an indicator of a higher water table. So all communities, like the Maasai, they call it olerai. And they know that it is actually an indicator that good water is available on some of these sites. Okay. So talking to them and combining with the science, I'm able to know that such an area is suitable for restoration, because it would actually, the trees would actually do much better because there's sufficient groundwater available in some of the sites. And when you see the balanites, the desert date, you know that this tree can survive even in the harshest of the conditions. So that one just tells you that this area is properly degraded. So some of these trees are actually just indicators. When you see them in abundance, even the communities are aware, when you see this, now you've reached proper arid area. And for science, that is also the same. Yeah.
And I'm curious because, again, you definitely say you've worked with a number of pastoralists. And I mean, these are a group of people who will migrate from one area to the other. So how does it work for them? Maybe for this year, they plant trees around one particular area, Area A, and then they migrate to Area B. So who is going to now fend for the trees that were in Area A?
So when we're talking to pastoralists, there's something we call the normal traditional grazing system. So the way they move, there's always a grazing committee.
Okay.
It used to be there traditionally, and sometimes, like Just Dig It, we help reform and strengthen the through governance of these grazing committees, because these grazing committees are able to delineate areas within the arid and semi-arid areas. Because rangelands, the best use of rangelands is pastoralism, because it allows you to, if you're aware of what you're doing, to only graze in areas that have vegetation and to avoid areas that are already degraded. But this kind of education needs to strengthen both those traditional cultural systems of the grazing committees, that you'll be able to say that we have declared an area an olopololi, which is a dry season grazing area for the Maasai. And when we've declared it as an olopololi, we say we need it to have 4 rain seasons before you return it to use.
Hold that thought. I'm being told that we do have a call. Carol from Machakos. Carol, good morning. What is your view on our discussion this morning?
Yes, thank you, Dr. for those insights. My view is a lot of organizations in the arid and the semi-arid areas are focused on food insecurity, alleviating food insecurity. So where do these organizations start in integrating climate change into their programs so as to ensure that they achieve the food security aim both at the community and the household level?
Right. Thank you, Carol, from Machakos. And have you sounds for good morning. Dr. Matters different as where Just Dig It and the matters of food security. How do you integrate all this?
One of the things I see whenever we work in arid areas, we've met partners who are doing aspects of food security whereby they're either feeding children or feeding vulnerable groups. And I've always thought to myself in such spaces, would it be useful for these communities to integrate some quick win solutions for these groups, so that feeding somebody is just giving them food for today. But if you introduce a species, let's say pasture, you have given them an income within 3 months. You introduce papaya, you've given them an income within 8 to 10 months. You just introduce different components of vegetation that the community is able to make long-term, middle to long-term income from the same environment, and also now alleviate their food security issues through also alternative livelihoods, which is a climate smart intervention, because instead of just having one intervention, the same way smallholder farmers have diversified activities in the farm, is the same way we should also diversify our programming in these communities, whereby you have a component on alternative livelihoods. There's beekeeping potential, which goes hand in hand with revegetation. So if you use in areas that have human-wildlife conflict, beekeeping has been used to actually prevent elephants from encroaching on some areas. So introducing such technologies whereby there's beehives and also an olopololi, this is a dry season grazing area that is also being restored through the water harvesting infrastructures. Right. You actually get to win more, and the community actually gets to have a long-term intervention both on restoration and also alternative livelihoods that they can also engage in meaningfully, because beekeeping is the least labor-intensive activity for ASAL areas, because you just need to install a hive and inspect if bees are within. Yes. If you provide some sufficient watering services like the half-moon bands, which would collect some water, the bees would get water from the same site, the vegetation would give them the food.
All right, I'm being told that we'll have another call from Juja. Good morning. Kindly tell me your name and what is your view on our discussion this morning concerning matters of Kenya's forest cover.
My name is Mwangi Hai.
Okay.
And I was just flipping through the channels of TV and I saw this program.
Okay.
And my contribution is what Dr. Wino is talking about is so important for Kenya.
Okay.
I happen to be somebody who is retired, but I have worked for 32.5 years in the semi-arid area.
You're right.
I've even written a manual which is being used by the universities to teach our children.
Okay, okay.
And I'm so passionate, and I have loved what I've seen in the passion of this man.
Right.
I would like to sit down with him and see perhaps we can put our minds together and tell Kenya where we ought to go.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, most definitely. He's here, he's smiling, so he's definitely waiting for that meet. Will you have a question for Dr. this morning?
Yeah, simply, it's just to get the contact, eh?
Okay.
Just get the contact, and of course, I want to appreciate what TV47 has done to bring this to Kenyans, eh?
Much appreciated.
And two is that I would like to talk to Dr. and see where we can go. I love the passion.
All right.
Yes.
And kindly, before I also let you go, as someone who is also has a vast experience in matters, ISIL areas and restoration of the same, where are we heading as a country? What will you advise the government, the current government, in matters Kenya's forest cover?
Actually, we don't have a choice but to develop the arid and semi-arid areas.
Right.
People there have livelihood, but they are being destroyed by climate change.
Okay.
For example, 2022 we lost a lot of livestock, particularly in Kajiado.
Okay.
And the reason is that we don't have grass, and the climate change means that one time there will be no rain, then another time there will be a lot of rain.
Oh yes.
Like we are being told now, there will be El Nino.
Okay.
We lost so many livestock.
Okay.
There are families without any livelihood right now.
Right.
Traditionally, we can't go that way.
Okay. Thank you.
In fact, I'm in the process of writing a proposal to 4 counties to start with.
All right.
Where we say, let us grow grass for our livestock.
All right.
That is the way we protect our people.
Okay.
Yeah, and their livelihood.
All right, Mwangi from Juja, have yourself a great morning, and thank you for your insights. Most definitely after this, we'll be looking for his contact so that you can actually have now that meet of a cup of tea as you discuss matters forestry. But then he definitely raises a number of issues there. Key actually to note is that now when it comes to devolution and how different devolved units are really taking up this matters climate change. Well, even as the ASL counties, you've definitely worked with a number of these counties. What is the progress so far? I mean, last month we was taking stock of 10 years of devolution, but what has been 10 years of now climate change in some of these ASL areas?
For me, what I'm looking forward in this was, I was looking forward to seeing more restoration being mentioned in the CIDPs for these counties that are in ASAL areas, because we cannot continue in the imagination that the pastoralists will continue their livelihoods through this loss and the current changing climates within the same knowledge systems that they have had. We have to actually take initiatives as counties. We have to actually prioritize restoration of areas, and this can actually be easily done with especially the ASAL counties, because they both have communally owned or either communally managed lands, and most of the time these are usually the areas that are the most degraded. When you have your private land, you always tend to protect it, but then when you have communal resources, then the use is always on the higher component. And this is the same areas that are also being used by wildlife that is outside the national parks. So there should be a concerted effort by counties, especially within the ASAL areas, to actually put even plans, just even demarcate areas and say this is our restoration requirements as a county, and then you'd allow for people and other partners to also be able to come in and say, okay, we can be able to support you restore 1,000 hectares or 2,000 hectares, because the scale of degradation that we need to restore is so large. In a place, you find if Kajiado County is 20,000 square kilometers, and we barely done only 40,000 hectares within that county. So there's still so much potential of restoration within the old ranches, the old community ranches that were in such areas. And this causes the case also of how is the counties also spatially planning their areas. Because you have to spatially plan an area with the awareness that also pastoralists would still need the olopololis, the dry season grazing areas, would still need the encarons, would still need to have even movement zones, even wildlife would still need this area. So even in our spatial planning, we have to be cognizant that pastoralism is an activity that is the best user of our rangelands, but we should also be cognizant that it's been degraded over time, that we need to put in interventions both policy and also infrastructurally.
I was actually coming out to that point. Policies.
Yeah.
Is it that we don't have stringent laws in some of these devolved units, and mostly in the assholes, to ensure that we actually curb deforestation and other issues?
I know we've had a draft ASAL policy as a country, so we want, first of all, to finalize that one, and then at least within the county system, so the counties are able to be aware of fully what the ASAL policy should be, let's say, for the country. And then also, this for me, counties within the ASAL areas have a unique resource. They have indigenous knowledge within the pastoral communities that are within these areas. So the contribution of these communities should be key in how these rangelands are supposed to be used. Right. Because it is one thing to design a program, let's say from Nairobi, but then it is another thing to actually execute a rangeland program in a part of Turkana, because the community you need to engage with at that point would have to be the sedentary living community in such areas.
Right.
Yes.
And he was also talking about matters of drought, and specifically in Kajiado, where in 1 year there's a lot of rain, the next there's no rain. Last year we did see one of the worst droughts in the country, and I know definitely even for you it's one of those memorable years that you'll ever remember. As even just dig it, do you have data that you'd probably share with the pastoralists, that you tell them that we are forecasting that for the next few months, this is how things will be looking like. For the next few years, this is how things will be looking like.
As this digit, we want to share key stories. One of the key stories we'd want to share is that there are groups in Kajiado that never received any rains from the time we planted some grass in their grass seed banks in 2019. And they received their first rains in some of those seed banks this year, and they've harvested grass. There is a group in Lenkisim that has not received any rains that have been to germinate the grass that has been available in their site. And that shows you how climate change is affecting this. But the women in that community have not given up. They still visit the grass seed bank. They still ensure that they're weeding. They ensured now they've seeded the whole grass seed bank. Now in preparation for El Nino, they've fenced the grass seed bank. They're just waiting for the rain. They're still engaged in other alternative livelihoods because a couple of beehives, they still do beadwork. But if you look at it with one rain event, that grass seed bank will yield a result. So these stories need to be told. These stories whereby the communities have waited for a long time. Because last year, most Kenyans would probably be aware that probably last year was a drought. But for us in the ASALs, last year was a peak of almost a 4-year of failed rain seasons.
Okay.
So by the time we got some rains this year, we were only hoping, and looking at the trends of climate from some of the literature that we read, you see that the season is shifting towards the October, November, December rain season. So the long rains in the ASALs are now, the short rains are now becoming the most reliable rains in the ASAL areas. So what can we do to plan for the October, November, and December rains? We have only 1 month. This is September. We have to truly get digging the way Just Dig It does.
All right.
Yes.
Definitely love that. I was taking a look at a comment on socials, someone asking matters the seeds. You had mentioned it before it took a short break, but then they definitely now want a whole clarification of how do you select the seeds that you probably want to go and actually grow. Instead, actually now buying ile ishapandwa, unaenda tu unaeka. Now the seeds, how do you play along that? I
want to talk about grass seeds because in rangeland restoration, that is one of the most important species that you have to also select wisely. One of the things we do is that you look at also the historical use of that land. If an area was a grassland savanna, you'd always want to regain it back to a grassland savanna. That is an ecosystem regained. So when you talk to the communities and you ask them about the species and you hear them, I'm using the Maasai because Just Dig It to work with the Maasais in Kajiado, though we're expanding the landscapes.
Right.
But they will give you a list of species that they prefer. And from this list of species, using science, you'll know that some of these species prefer saline degraded areas. Some of these species prefer some rocky kind of soils areas. And then you'd find other species that are useful, that have a wide range. So basing on those, we try and promote the grass seed banks to grow for us these key 4 species, because the quantities we require to restore degraded rangelands is so high in terms of seed tonnage that what is being produced in the market, at times when you're looking for seed, it is not available. And grass seed is unlike most species because it also has to break dormancy. So you cannot just harvest this season and plant immediately the next week and for it to germinate. So you have to treat the seed. So our women groups go through a whole enterprise training whereby they're trained on components of seed harvesting, they're trained on cleaning, storage, and also just labeling, so that when somebody is coming to buy seed, is able to know that this seed was harvested in March and this other one was harvested last year. So the person buying would prefer to buy the older seed and leave the younger seed to break dormancy, because in grass seed has to be treated differently. You have to give it some sufficient amount of time for it to break dormancy so that you're able to get a good crop out of it in a subsequent season. Right. For trees, that should be the same. Talk to the experts, go to the carefree offices that are local, go to the KFS offices, get the right seed suited for your right area. Mm-hmm. And most of the time when you get this seed from these institutions, you'd find the seeds have information on even germination viability and information like that would actually influence you in terms of knowing that it is suitable and what good performance would be. All right.
Yes. And as we wrap up, yesterday we did see a number of groups donating to Kenya for the whole climate change. From where you sit, how can this money be used? We were talking about buying different seeds, and it really trickles down to different kind of users. I mean, yeah, we do have billions of shillings being poured even for the climate summit week, but then how can this money be used, actually even specifically for the SL areas?
For me, get the partners working in ASAL areas involved in discussing this, because they will tell you the acreages they require. As Just Dig It, we have done our maths for some of the acreages we know. We know the minimum amount to actually restore an acre of degraded ASAL area, and that needs to be, we need to be in that table. So let's talk and put concrete solutions on how best to use, because we cannot restore all our rangelands at the same time, but you can start with the middle degraded towards severe degraded over time and get a much better success rate. We've seen cases globally of people successfully restoring degraded ASALs. We should also be join that case of having much more than a million hectares restored of degraded areas, especially in Kenya.
All right. Yes. And as you also give us your final remarks, I'm curious, how many trees have you ever planted, ever in your life?
For me, I'm scratching 15,000 trees.
15,000?
Yeah, through most of my research projects and most of my community activity.
Right.
Yes, personally.
I won't mention, because I'm pretty sure it has Jafika Mia. But then give us your last words.
ASALs have communities, and ASALs have livestock, and also ASALs have wildlife. They occupy 82 to 80% of Kenya's land area. We truly need to critically rethink this space, because it can offer so much in terms of production potential for the country, in terms of livestock value chains, revegetation amounts, and also afforestation goals. So it is an area that needs a new thinking. It's an area that needs new engagements, and we have to put our communities in ASALs at the center of this discussion, because they have knowledge that we need to tap into, and we also need to use that knowledge together with the science to actually get so much more areas done well. Right. And the organizations that can be able to get into these initiatives are so encouraged to try, because you'll find the best communities in the ASALs to work with in regraining.
Right.
Thank you.
Are you heading to Dubai for COP28?
Myself, I'm always busy within pastoral areas, so from one arid area within Africa to the next, but sure enough, we'll see you in COP.
See you in COP28.
Yes, see you in
most
COP28.
Definitely. And actually, speak of the COP28, President-designate Dr. Sultan Al-Jaber is expected to make an announcement today. Speaking of matters, climate finance announcements today, so we definitely be expecting all that. But then, asante sana, Dr. Jesse.